So quick correction first. My name is Abdella Ali.
Ali.
But
Oh.
I liked his name better, so if you're going to call me either, it's great with me. So Abdella Ali, I'm here to talk to you guys about Automagic UI elements with Redux. What does that even mean? You might be asking. So with the web nowadays, we have a big push for component-based architecture. What this really means is that you can see things like React, Angular 2, Aurelia, a bunch of other libraries now that kind of push this idea of component-based architecture. And what this really does is it changes how we handle all of our data flow in our applications. And this is actually a challenge, but it's also a really cool opportunity because what else can we do differently now when we have components be such important parts of how we do everything? So one thing that's kind of come up a lot now is Redux. Redux is a library that handles data flow differently. Well, not differently, actually, because back in the day, you did data flow by having a global state and passing it down, and that was terrible. But now we're doing it again, and it's not terrible this time, I swear. With Redux, a big reason why it's not terrible is because it's immutable. I'll get into that a little later, but the idea is this is now being used in quite a few React applications. And it's great, it's really cool. And so I wondered to myself, can I use Redux for anything else that's cool, anything else that's interesting? What about styles? And this is what this talk is about, really. So really it came up actually because of React Native. I started playing with React Native a little while ago, and React Native is really cool if you guys haven't seen it or used it. It's I think it's like a flavor of React where the whole idea is that you can create components that map directly to native components in your applications for mobile applications. And that means that you don't have to worry about hybrid applications and the performance issues that come with that. You actually have really fast, really cool native applications. So how does Redux work? This is really hard to talk about. People get really confused, so I'll try to be as simple as possible. I don't want to actually, give a lesson here. I want to give you a quick overview. So with Redux, what we're doing is we're sort of saying in a very simple way that I want to change what my application's current state is. And we do this through actions. So you can see the flow over here. You see I have actions on top, reducers, store, and my view. So my view can click a button, let's say, and fire off an action saying, update this number. My reducers can subscribe to these actions, because I can have quite a few. And they can say, all right, whenever I hear the action, update a number, I'm going to change some value somewhere else because I need to manage that state for some reason. And finally, all these reducers are compiled together into one overarching object. And this is actually a giant immutable object that represents your state. There's a lot of reasons for doing this. One really obvious reason is that when you have immutable states that is constantly updated on every action, you have an opportunity to serialize your state and rewind your application at any given time. You also have a very controllable and predictable state. You can see everything that happens to your overall application state at any given time just by seeing what action got fired. I won't go into it too much. It's really, really cool. I'd recommend if you guys haven't had any chances to experience it and play with it, just give it a shot. It's not that scary. It looks scary. I got scared. I did it. I'm still a little bit scared, but not as much anymore. So you might be asking, what's the problem? What am I trying to do here? What am I trying to fix here? Well, like I mentioned before, I was playing with React Native, and I found out something very terrifying to me. It shook me to my core. Oh, it's gone. I had a slide here earlier that said, well, React Native does not use CSS. So this is a big deal. And the reason why this is a big deal is because a lot of us are used to using CSS. We have style sheets. We have all sorts of things that we do with our style sheets that are very, very powerful. So having to not use those anymore is very, very scary. So we do have actually some other things we need to consider too. We don't want to have our states managed in their components as much anymore, and that can potentially mean our style states. The relationship between style and state is very, very important. Whenever you click a button and you want something to change color, whenever you have something you want to hide or show, or a button you want to disable, all these things are directly tied to your state. So it led me to think maybe my styling can actually go up with everything else into my global state. And unidirectional data flow is a part of this. This is part of what React and Redux and a lot of frameworks talk about now, where you have all your state get flown down, sort of like a downstream to your application. And when this happens, we kind of have to change how we approach a lot of things. So, oh, actually, here it is. So the real challenge is React Native does not use CSS. It sort of uses CSS, actually. I'll get into it a bit more right now. So this is how you style things in React Native. So you can see over here, I have an object I create. I call it styles. And it has a few properties on it. I have a base property, I have a background property, and I have an active property. And that all looks very CSS-y. It actually really isn't. It's kind of a fake CSS. It's an object that you create, and then you see on the right, kind of just pass it in on a style tag on an element. It's pretty cool, pretty straightforward, and at first you can kind of get it. It doesn't take too much work. But there are other ways. If you really do want to use a CSS file, you can use this cool library I found where you can basically write CSS files and have it translate into those objects. It's not real CSS. Again, what you're doing is you're writing your CSS files, and then this cool little library reads those files and converts it right directly into a StyleSheet object. So it's kind of maybe not super useful unless you want to separate concerns visually. But there are a few other caveats. I mean, you have to consider that not all CSS styles are available. Because it's not real CSS, only the ones that are needed and approved and required are there. You don't have to, you can't assume that actually that all components have all styles too, because some components you can find on the internet or some components that exist that are natively created have no styles on them or only have 1 or 2 style properties available you can change. This can get kind of confusing. It can get kind of hectic. And it's, again, back to this whole terrifying thing. You don't really have that flexibility you have with the web here. You have to, because this is actually not the web. It's not a web view in your application. This is a completely native component. So the styles you are changing translate directly to native styles. There are other reasons why you might be a little nervous about this, but in the end, you don't really have a choice, so whatever. You have to kind of just get used to it if you want to use React Native. And the question then is, how can I use it in the best possible way? So that's where Redux potentially comes in. I thought to myself, can I use Redux to manage my style state now that I can't use CSS? And if I did, how would that look like? So this is a terrifying looking thing. It's a reducer. If you guys aren't familiar, I won't go over too much. If you guys are familiar, take a look. Really what I'm doing here is I'm setting up 2 things. I'm setting up an initial state, and in this initial state I'm saying I want a button that has the properties width of 100, height of 30, padding 10, background color light gray, etc. And on the right-hand side, this is what we call a reducer. And this reducer is listening for any actions. And you can see there's a little switch statement. If it gets an increment action, it'll set the style or the background colors to green. If it's decrement action, you get the colors to red. I won't go into it any more than that. But basically, that's kind of how I was thinking about really updating and creating objects that represent my styles. Normally, you would see something like this, and you'd see it handle data, not styles, like a username or, let's say, like a new user being added to a list of users. That kind of stuff is what you see reduces for. Never styles. So I give this a shot, and I'm like, does it work? So my actual view looks like this now. So again, very terrifying if people aren't familiar with, especially React Native. These are facsimiles for essentially buttons. You have text, touchable opacity for buttons, and text inside those buttons. And what you see here is on my onPress for the one button, I have an increment, and onPress for the other button, I have a decrement. That's, again, basically it. And my style is a style sheet that I'm creating on the fly whenever I get a new button object passed in. So on the very far right, you see how this whole counterstyle.2js.button, this is coming in from my global state. It's getting passed in. And because of the way React works, whenever my global state changes, all that information gets re-subscribed to and updated. So it's really cool. It seems like magic. You don't have to actually handle the manual updating of anything. It just knows that something changed, I have to update, and it updates itself. And it does work, I promise. Let me even show you an example right over here. So, oh, and it broke. So never mind. Let's not worry about that too much. I promise you, though, it worked. I had a little thing and clicked on an increment and decrement button, and it was awesome. Colors updated. The really important thing here is you want to start thinking about what I'm doing here. I'm handling what would normally be handled in a local state inside my actual component itself, I'm tossing it up. I'm tossing it up to the global state. My logic reducer, the one that would handle things like user or numbers being updated or who knows what, now has a companion reducer. It listens to the same actions. When I update and increment a number, I have an action called increment, and I do that updating of state somewhere else. But I also listen to that same action in my style reducer. And whenever the increment happens, I then change the color somewhere. And I'm storing my styles as a immutable object, which is also very interesting because immutable objects, if you guys aren't familiar, are things that you can't change after you make them, essentially. You have to make a brand new one whenever you want to change it. This is very valuable for not breaking stuff. Mutability is a big problem often, and it causes a lot of complications and issues. So I generally try to avoid them, immutable objects, that is. And having a way to create immutable style objects seems like it'd be kind of cool. So, I mean, yeah, whatever, cool, interesting. So what else am I getting out of this? So here's some ideas, some things I tried a few times here and there, and it was pretty cool. I created composable styles that were composed functionally. I had a button object that returned me all the styles for a button, round component that returned me the styles to round the button, and an accent style that gave me the right accent color, and all this with the final elevated style like generator into one object, and that gave me a button that was round, that had the right accent color, and was hovering. So this is a very programmatic approach to styling, and it's a very interesting one too. And it makes us maybe think about different ways to write all of our styles. So maybe you can also take advantage of Node.js, because there's a really cool thing called a record. A record is a cool object where you can create default properties, and these default properties have to be used. You can't make another property on this object. But additionally, if you, let's say, delete a property or like null it, it doesn't actually go null. It just returns to its previous state. Why this is interesting is maybe you could have an object that represents your default styles for a button or who knows what, and whenever you want to, null that, you don't have to do very much. You just have to say, reset essentially, and then you go back to your default styles. This kind of can be considered almost like a class. So what else can you do? Maybe some server-side style generation. Maybe you can share styles for iOS and Android in React Native. That's very interesting too, because with React Native, you'd have different components that you have to draw out in your markup for iOS and for Android, because they literally, again, map to native versions of themselves. And iOS and Android are not the same platform. They have different native facsimiles for like buttons, for example. So would we want to do this? Potentially. Actually, it could be really cool. But is this restricted to React Native anyway? I keep talking about React Native. Can you do it anywhere else? Absolutely. You don't need to use a StyleSheet option generator. You can use it in Angular too if you wanted to. Just create some other sort of object generator and pass it in just like this. This style that you could provide with like these variables, you could provide with a very fancy immutable object that you get from your global state. My point here really is that it's not really tied to React Native. It's just very valuable in React Native. You can do the same thing everywhere. But if you did do that, what would the challenges be? So really, CSS exists for a reason. I mean, I know we yell at it a lot and we don't like it all the time, but it does a lot of things for us that are really great. Complex state selectors like hover and active are really, really hard to implement in JavaScript. You can do it, and it's not like the worst thing in the world, but in CSS, you literally just add a colon, say hover, and colon, and say active, and you're basically done. So doing that same thing in your JavaScript, especially in an immutable global state object, it can be a bit of a headache, a bit of a pain. Additionally, it's really, really kind of removing all these things that we wanted to separate in the first place. We'd like to have separate style sheets because it let people work on these style sheets separate from us. It kind of removed them from our overarching HTML documents. We did have much better separation concerns by doing this. So kind of converging everything back into a global state can provide a lot of the headaches we had when we had styles right in line with our HTML. And often, we do want to style things differently for different platforms. So a global state that maybe used across multiple different platforms, like Android, iOS, web, mobile, who knows what, all sharing the same style objects, may not be what we want to do. We might want to actually keep those things inside of our style sheets and inside of our components themselves. So should I even start doing this, you might ask yourself. It depends. I'd really say if you're playing with React Native, this is a pretty cool idea, and it works really, really well. It really does give you a good way to handle managing your states. as for styles. And if you do want to have the same styles across Android and iOS, it's a really nice, painstakingly, easily implemented system that doesn't provide too much headache. So what about like working in a team with designers and working with other developers? It gets really hard to work with designers, though, and other developers when you're all using the same file. I don't know if you guys have ever had to do it before. Share one file across design, development, maybe 2 developers, maybe 2 designers. It's the worst thing in the world, really. So I don't like doing it again. You can maybe get around this a little bit by coming up with some team agreements and breaking down files into separate pieces, maybe a style reducer versus a logic reducer. But it's maybe not always worth it. And honestly, I can't decide if adding all this stuff is just creating more business logic. You know, business logic is great, it's cool, but I don't want to make more of it unnecessarily. But maybe I'm just actually moving things around. Maybe the things I always considered as not business logic, like inline styles that conditionally show and hide, are really business logic, absolutely 100%. And I'm not really doing much other than shifting the blame somewhere else. So what are the conclusions here? So we have an opportunity. I think this is the big thing here for me. I had to play with React Native, and it was really weird, and I learned some interesting stuff about how styles work for me. And it really kind of challenged my position about how to absolutely create components, how to create styles, how to do any of these things. So with the changing web, with the changing mobile platform, we, I think, should try to explore more, try to see what we can do differently. There's a lot of discussion out there right now about whether we even need CSS. Some people think that we can do it all in JavaScript. And I guess this is kind of saying the same thing. So React Native really does need something like this. Maybe not exactly what I implemented, but managing styles and state can be a pain in React Native. Doing it all in line is also painful. So we need to maybe find a way to push things into a more clean, coherent system. And hopefully we, as a community, come up with one. And a very important thing that we always forget is that data and styles are very, very tightly coupled. And styles are important. So you got to make sure that when you're creating your system for data management and your data flow, you always consider your styles and consider how your styles are being passed through your system and how your application is updating its view. Because if you don't, you're going to have something that looks wonky, looks weird, and it's going to be really hard to work with. And finally, I really recommend playing with Redux. It's really great. It's really awesome. There's also NGRX, which is really cool too. NGRX is like an Angular 2 version of Redux, essentially. It uses observables, and it's, other than that, more or less the same thing. This entire system of having unidirectional data flow in a global mutable state is really, really awesome. It's not as crappy as it was back in the day having global state. It's actually pretty great. So I would recommend anybody here who is curious and anybody here who's working with React to give it a shot. And that's basically it. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. Come on over. My brother's name is Ali, and people call him Ali, and I'm sure he understands your pain.
Everyone just calls me Della, so that works for me too.
Okay, perfect. I don't like people calling me other names, so except for Lady. Okay, I know you said you wouldn't, but can you explain the reducer to us in full detail?
All right, I'll do reducers real quick. I'll give you a summary. So imagine a reducer as a slice. Oh wow, this is hard to do actually. It's a slice of an overall state. Your state being, imagine a giant object that represents what's going on in your application. A property that's like a list of users, a property that's, is user logged in, all that in one big object. So reducer is a way to kind of not look at that whole object at once, but slices of it and manipulate slices of it. So whenever you change something in your application, you click a button, you do any sort of interesting action, your reducer listens for this change, and then it changes that slice of your overall global state. I don't know if that helped at all. It sounds really confusing, but it's not as scary as you think it is.
No, okay, it was good, perfect. Okay, and then, so assuming you were a web developer before, how long did it take you to get comfortable building in React Native?
Who says I'm comfortable? I mean, no, that's not true.
You gave a talk on it.
It's easier. It didn't take very long. React Native, I thought would be a lot more like React or a lot more like the web pure. it has a lot of similes. It's very similar in a lot of ways, but it's different in a lot of ways. So it's still growing pains for me. I'm still understanding some really core things, and it's actually challenging in other ways too, because I feel like a lot of the things I thought were the right way to do things on the web don't make sense on mobile. Not even on mobile, on native mobile. So it's hard, but it's good. It's really good. It makes up for it by being really performant.
Okay, okay. And then why would you build a React Native app versus just a React app and then a mobile app?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Why would you want to go hybrid? Why wouldn't you want to go hybrid versus native? So React Native is really, really good at giving you really high-performant applications. If you've ever built a hybrid application on mobile, you had to deal with potentially memory leaks, lag, and just general slow 20 frames per second or less performance. And we don't really like that. That's not great. It doesn't give you good experience, and users hate it. They notice it right away. They give you 2 stars on the stores because they're like, this thing is slow. So React Native is really, really fast. It's because it's not web view inside of an application. It's literally creating an application from scratch for you with all the native components that it needs. And it does this also with some intelligent performance enhancing tools that React and Facebook implements it themselves to give you a really, really good system. It's not a lot of work for you to make it performant. That's all taken care of.
Okay. Do you still love the web?
I love the web. I still make apps on the web. I'm making an app on the web right now. I'm making
You
like
have to
2.
choose.
I have to choose.
Yes. I'm sorry.
100% the web. I can do whatever I want on the web. It's always terrible, but it's mine.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem.